This is Old Mountain Media.
It's a hot summer night in Elma, Washington, a little town off Highway 12 heading west from the capital city of Olympia. Picture yourself on a small 5-acre farm surrounded by hills of evergreen. You love this place, the homestead. It's been in your family for 3 generations, and there is nowhere you'd rather be. You've just finished feeding your chickens, checking on the horses, and locking up the stables for the evening. The crickets are out in full force, and you can't wait for that cool glass of sweet tea that's been brewing in the sun. As you walk into your small 4-bedroom home next to the barn your great-grandfather built in the early 1900s, your phone starts to ring. Ugh, can't I just get one moment's peace? You walk over to the phone, lift up the receiver, and clear your throat. Hello?
It's Judy.
Oh, hey, Judy. I was just about to grab some of the sweet tea your mother taught me to make. What's up?
Jen and I were out in the woods today. We saw something that will blow your mind. I want to show you, but I'm afraid what you'll say.
What the devil are you talking about? Why would I say anything mean? Come on, Judy, it's me. What's on your mind?
Well, that's just it. I think it might be just in my mind, but maybe it's something more. Would you consider coming out to the old berry patch off Keys Road with us?
Well, I suppose. What's this all about? You sound very mysterious right now. Not like the Judy I know.
There's something living in the woods, and I think I know what it is, but I need someone else to confirm it. Will you come with me?
I guess so, but is it dangerous?
I don't know. Maybe not, but it's something I have to figure out, and I need your help.
Okay, when? Tomorrow? Next week?
No, tonight. It has to be tonight.
Judy, I just finished closing up the farm. Really? Tonight?
Trust me, you won't be sorry. I'll be there in 20 minutes to pick you up.
Okay, I guess I have no choice. You hang up the phone and stare out the window. This is not like the Judy you know. This is weird. She is acting bizarre and is making little sense, but you've known Judy your whole life and want to help her out. You throw on your parka, grab your hiking boots, and walk out the front door. You stand in the coming darkness, waiting to find out what Judy is on about, and consider that she might be seeing things. After 15 minutes, a truck pulls up. Judy is in the back seat with your sister Jen in the passenger seat. Come on, let's go! You walk up to the car, jump in the back seat, and buckle up. Whatever this is about, you have no idea. What you do know is that Judy and Jen, the talkative sisters that seem to never shut up, are sitting in silence, the look of dread on their faces. Dread and anticipation.
Pacific Northwest Sasquatch Shadows presents Something Cryptid. This Way Comes.
It's Bigfoot! Where? There, on the riverbank. See it, right there in the shadows. Jen Judy and Judy's husband Ray have just run for their lives from the riverbank outside of Elma on Keys Road. If you haven't listened to part 1 of this story, head back to episode 6 of season 2. We'll be right here when you catch up. The trio have heard multiple rocks hitting the river, heavy breathing, and after an evening of blood-pumping frights, they were ready to get the hell out of there. The steep riverbank, almost a sheer 25-foot drop to the water, was no easy climb. And with an unknown shadow on their trail, it became evident that they needed to escape. Fast. They stopped halfway to the car to listen. Silence. And then, crashing bushes. And more breathing. Judy grabbed Jen's arm in a death grip.
It's coming. Jen, it's coming.
Judy scrambled up the rest of the hill and to the car in a blind panic. And although Jen didn't see anything, she followed her. Ray was already at the car most likely, and she was going to give him a piece of her mind for ditching them, although she couldn't really blame him for running. They scrambled up the slope, picking at the roots in the ground, trying to find anything to help them up the hill, mud and dirt shoving up their fingernails. Judy felt searing pain in her hands that spread up her arms, but there was no time to lose. The breathing behind them was echoing off the trees, and they could hear footsteps now, faster, and leaving the river behind. Finally, they arrived at the truck. It was pitch black, and they could just make out the silhouette of the vehicle against the glow of the stars that were casting minimal light on its roof. As they sprinted to the car, breathing fast and doing their best not to slip on the gravel road, they saw the windows, steamed up, and looked for Ray. He was sitting in the driver's seat, staring straight forward. Jen pounded on the window while Judy grabbed the handle of the passenger door.
Ray, open up!
Ray continued to stare forward, in a daze, his hands gripping the steering wheel.
Ray, for God's sake, unlock the doors!
Judy was practically screaming. Ray snapped out of his daze and quickly unlocked the doors. Judy and Jen climbed into their seats, grabbed their seatbelts, and sat in silence. Judy kept glancing back to the trailhead they had just exited and saw a stillness that was unnerving. Surely the Sasquatch, or whatever it was going to burst through the trees any moment. After about 10 minutes, Jen turned to Ray.
We need to see what that was. Are you crazy?
Answered Judy.
No, we need to see. We need to know in case someone else could get hurt. Ray, what do you think?
Ray continued to sit in silence.
Ray, are you okay? I'm sorry I left you. I don't know what came over me. I'm sorry.
Judy put her hand on Ray's shoulder.
Forget about that right now, Ray. We just need to get the hell out of here. Not until we see what that thing was.
Jen was sounding more determined as her confidence returned. They continued to sit in silence, Judy not convinced, but Ray starting to relax. The tension was finally leaving his body, and he slowly turned his head to the right to face the sisters.
All right, I'm not saying we should go back into the woods, but let's at least listen and make sure we aren't all imagining the same thing. I hardly think that was imagination, Ray, but yes, let's get out and listen. Judy, what do you think? Want to step out of the car and listen?
Judy was not sure what to think. She was scared out of her wits, but wanted an answer. She was thinking about her 3 daughters and their safety. Surely an answer would help her make better decisions about traveling into the wilderness.
Oh, okay, let's listen. But I'm staying next to the car.
They stepped out of the car and stood with their hands on the door handles, ready to jump in if they needed. There were no sounds from the river.
I think it's gone,
Jen said in a loud whisper. The air around them was silent. And then, a soft rustle of bushes that seemed to be only a few feet away grew louder.
Ray, throw a rock over there. See what happens.
Even in the darkness, Judy could make out Ray's look of shock at Jen's request. Reluctantly, though, he stooped down and grabbed a rock the size of his fist. He bounced it up and down a few times in his hands.
Well, here goes nothing.
He lightly tossed the rock in the direction of the rustling sound. The sound in the bushes grew louder and sounded more frantic, almost as if the bushes were being shaken with anger and frustration. The 3 continued to stand next to the car, frozen in fear. Something came over Judy. Even with this threatening sound, she seemed to be gaining confidence. Perhaps it was being with her family, perhaps being next to the car. Then again, it might have been the knowledge that something definitely was there and was no longer a question of if it was there. It was finally time to face her fears.
Hello?
Judy yelled in the direction of the commotion. She then whistled, wondering if this might have some sort of effect on their stalker, wondering if she'd get an answer. What she heard next was the strangest thing she had ever heard. The creature was trying to mimic her whistle. Matching pitch, there was a bizarre sound coming from the bushes, but it was not whistling as Judy had heard. Instead, it seemed to be trying to match the pitch with a vocalization from its throat, almost like singing, but an octave lower. It was high-pitched, but had deep undertones, evidently possessing incredible lung capacity. The sound seemed to be conjured from deep within the creature, and sounded effortless, as if this was normally how it communicated. It repeated the sound, and this time, it was much louder than Judy's whistle, echoing off the surrounding trees.
We need to get the hell out of here!
Ray's voice was unsteady, and the sisters knew he was right. Time to go. On their drive home, they sat in silence. After 10 minutes, Jen finally spoke up.
Okay, we just experienced something that I think we need to consider. Judy, we grew up with these stories. Dad used to tell us about Bigfoot all the time, but I thought it was just scary stories to frighten us. But I think that's what we just witnessed. Yeah, I think you're right.
Judy stared out the window and saw nothing but darkness and shadows speeding by.
I want to go out there again. Not tonight, but tomorrow. I think there's more to this than we know. You're crazy.
Ray was staring forward and sweat was dripping from his brow.
Maybe I am. But I want to know for sure.
Judy sat in silence considering her sister's idea.
Maybe Jen's right. Maybe we need to get evidence so we can share this and warn others. Okay, I'm in.
Ray scoffed and shook his head.
Fine. We'll go out tomorrow night. But you can be sure I'm bringing my gun. You can't shoot it, Ray. I know, Jen. But it'll make me feel better, okay?
They continued home, and when they arrived, they said goodnight. But sleeping was not possible. All three lay in the darkness, considering what they had heard, what they think they saw, and what could possibly be walking around in the dark shadows of the forest as they lay there in the safety of their beds. But were they safe? Judy woke the next day, the thought of the creature flooding her mind. She was now obsessed with knowing the truth.
I'm going to see this thing. Then I'll feel better.
Her sense of confidence had boosted overnight. That evening, Judy, Ray, and Jen returned to the same spot. They knew that with more witnesses, the more they would feel confident in their findings. And with so many people in society jeering at the thought or idea of Sasquatch, this would help them feel better about their experience. This would help them feel like they weren't crazy. The group of 7 individuals made their way in the darkness down the riverbank to where they had first heard the splashing sounds. They sat in silence, flashlights turned off, and peeked over rocks that were on the shore of the river. The rock throwing commenced. Splashes around them and the breathing and grunting sounds grew louder once more.
There must be a group of them,
Judy whispered loudly to Jen.
Shh.
Jen was on edge. Judy could hear it in her response. The rocks were landing on both sides of the river, on both sides of the group. After 20 minutes of continuing sounds, the group decided to leave and made their way back to their vehicles.
Did that just happen?
One of Judy's friends asked.
Yeah, it did. And I think we all know what is living out here now. But they didn't attack us. Maybe they just want us to leave them alone.
A week later, Jen and Judy decided to return one more time to the same area. Ray stayed home this time, not sure if he could deal with the threat of an unknown beast in the wilderness throwing rocks at them. Dark had settled in, and while Judy and Jen considered visiting the spot in daylight, they knew their chances were better at dusk or even later. They now had gained complete confidence, having had a few encounters and not being harmed. But they remained conscious of the fact that if this creature was in fact a Bigfoot, then they'd need to stay alert and careful. As they approached the spot that became known as Ground Zero for Bigfoot, they heard a new sound. Large rocks being clicked together, starting on the far side of the riverbank, and then answered with a similar clicking on the other side. It was some form of communication, and this immediately caused Judy to consider that these creatures, these Sasquatch, were highly intelligent.
I'm not screwing with these guys. Who knows what they will do?
But as she thought this, Jen had picked up 2 rocks and started banging them together herself.
Jen, what the hell are you doing? I just want to see what they'll do.
Jen continued banging her rocks together. Her rock banging was answered with nearby sticks snapping and rustling bushes on both sides. After this pseudo-communication, Judy and Jen decided this would be their last time to the area. They had now possibly upset the Sasquatch, and it was time to make better decisions. They had no idea what these things were, although they were fairly certain that it was the hairy man of legend, and they were pushing their luck. Over the next few years, Jen and Judy, and Ray, after much convincing, visited the area. They never heard sounds or saw evidence again.
Maybe they moved on. Maybe we scared them.
Judy would often think to herself. Whatever the reason, whatever the lack of evidence, the creatures were gone. Judy waited 15 years to come forward with this story. She knew the ridicule would be non-ending, and yet she knew that her story was important. She would often tell others,
We aren't alone. We need to respect the wilderness. We need to be humble and let creatures of the woods have their own homes. We need to be kind.
Jen moved to Florida, home of the skunk ape, and Judy continues to live in Elma. She has kept her story somewhat private, but always works to teach others about respecting those that dwell in the shadows, those that reside in the forests of the Olympic Peninsula. It's important to note that in the Pacific Northwest, while there are no stories of attacks or killings from our friends in the trees, there are moments when the heart stops, the sweat drops, and panic sets in. And that is exactly what happened to Steve, Molly, and Parker, the subjects of our next story from the dark surroundings of Elma, Washington. On a dark Saturday in April of 2008, Parker was driving his friends Steve and Molly up a few logging roads near Highway 8, 15 miles north of Elma. Molly had been coaxing her boyfriend Steve for months to teach her how to shoot a shotgun and to develop her shooting technique. When you drive through the wilderness and clear cuttings of Washington state, you'll often hear random gunfire. This is quite often where gun enthusiasts engage in target practice, and so Molly was excited to give the shotgun a go. The area above Elma is extremely dense with thick forests, and one might find themselves easily lost among the maze of logging roads and the hills that resemble each other. It's a bit like traveling through a labyrinth. Every turn looks familiar, even though you haven't been there before. The trio entered the logging road of choice near Satsep, north of Elma, and drove for hours.
Parker, are you sure you know where you're going? Well, Steve, since I'm the one driving, maybe you should just let me do my thing. He was just asking, Parker. He wasn't trying to be mean. I know. I I just don't recognize any of these roads. But I feel like I've been here before. I know that doesn't make sense. Or does it? Yeah, it does. I get the same feeling.
They traveled on, looking for intersections between logging roads. The cloud cover gave the feeling of night, even though it was just nearing sundown. They knew that the road would eventually lead them to Capitol Forest, which resides to the west of Olympia, and is a dark and foreboding part of the Olympic National Forest. Finally, they decided to turn around.
The further we go, the more lost I am,
said Parker. He pulled his F-150 pickup to the side, made a 5-point pivot, and directed the truck the way they had come. Molly was disappointed as she was looking forward to today's training, but she knew this was the best move for them. Getting lost out here was the stuff of nightmares. Every year, a dozen or so go missing, and while they usually are found, there have been cases where people have just disappeared, as if they vaporized into thin air. The night sky set in, and darkness surrounded the truck like a thick cloak of shade. As they continued down the road, Molly saw something out of the corner of her eye from the left of the truck. 2 huge eyes flashed in the sidelights of the truck.
What the? Look at that!
Molly pointed out the eyes, but they were gone.
Whoa. That deer must have had massive eyes,
said Steve.
I don't think that was a deer, man.
Parker was gripping the steering wheel and had pumped the brakes a few times. He then stopped the truck, and the 3 sat in the middle of the road, the truck idling. They stared into the distance, and 100 yards away, they saw huge eyes blinking at them. Parker and Steve exited the truck, but Molly had no intention of leaving the safety of the warm cab. She sat frozen in fear, barely able to breathe. The eyes appeared again, and they turned from white to a shade of light green.
Steve!
Parker whispered from outside the truck.
Steve! What kind of animal is that? I've never seen green eyes before. Not out here.
Steve couldn't answer. He was petrified. Parker came back to the cab, grabbed the shotgun, and fumbled with ammunition, trying to load the weapon. He could barely hold the gun without shaking. Molly felt as if something was taking control of her. She started to tap her feet spastically and rubbed her hands together fast and hard. Then, Molly screamed. She snapped out of her trance and saw the outline of a creature on the ground, but it was not just on the ground. It was propping itself on its fists, its huge forearms bulging with muscles. The creature looked like a lineman on a football team, crouched and ready to pounce. She couldn't make out its color as it was just out of the line of the truck's headlights, but those eyes, those green eyes, they kept blinking. Slowly they tilted to one side.
Oh my God,
said Steve.
That thing is at least 750 pounds.
Molly began to cry, sobbing and scared. Her body shook violently. She was about to lose control of her bodily functions when all of a sudden, her nose started to gush blood. It was the first nosebleed she had had in years, most likely brought on by the sheer terror of the sight in front of them. The creature stayed in the same position, apparently not scared of the vehicle, unlike deer and elk of the area that would run off immediately at the sight of a vehicle coming their way. But the head kept moving slowly back and forth, left and right, as if it was contemplating its next move. Parker and Steve jumped back into the cab. The radio suddenly turned on and static poured out of the speakers. Parker slammed his palm against the volume knob, attempting to turn the radio off.
We gotta go.
Stepping on the gas, the truck sped off on the gravel road, spitting rocks and stones behind it. Molly continued to whimper. She watched the creature as they left it in the dust, illuminated in red light from the taillights. She saw it finally stand up, turn away from them, and run up the hill through a clear-cutting on their left. Its strides were huge, and she knew exactly what they had just seen. A Bigfoot. The 3 sat in silence. Parker was gripping the steering wheel so hard that his knuckles were white. Steve tried to put his arm around Molly, but for some reason, he couldn't lift his arms up to comfort her. Molly, who had stopped crying, sat petrified. None of them spoke a word for at least an hour. Parker finally did speak up, but could not seem to get complete sentences out. He muttered over and over.
That was huge. Huge. The eyes, huge. Huge.
The group wanted to get the hell out of the woods, and finally, at 1 a.m., they did. Parker dropped Molly and Steve off at their home and sped off without saying another word. The next day, Parker stopped by their house. He walked in through the screen door, and the three sat at the kitchen table in silence. After 10 minutes, Parker spoke.
I woke up this morning with a nosebleed. I haven't had one in years, kind of like yours last night, Molly. What could have caused that? I don't know. This isn't normal. I think what we saw was... Well, I think what we saw was a Bigfoot. It was running faster than a deer. Didn't you guys see that? What I saw was massive. A head and shoulders like a human. And when it stood up, those arms were really long, reaching to its legs. I think you might be right, Molly. I think we just saw something unbelievable. And I don't know if I ever want to see one again.
Parker was staring out the window as he said this, looking at the surrounding hills, but with eyes that seemed to be staring into an abyss. They continued to sit in silence. Molly felt a bit foolish for stating what she had thought the creature was, but the other two nodded, as if in agreement. As the morning grew into noon, they continued to sit at the table. All three were experienced campers and adventurers, but nothing like this had ever happened to them. It was inexplicable. Never again would they return to the woods at night, not without at least 10 or more people with them. The dread they had felt was new. The dread they felt was unlike anything they could explain. It was pure terror at its deepest form. And they had no intention of ever feeling that terror again. They knew they had just witnessed a phenomenon that would stay with them the rest of their lives, and to this day, neither Molly, Steve, or Parker would ever drive more than an hour on a logging road, especially without GPS and a map. To get lost in the woods, there's nothing quite as dreadful and nothing quite as humbling. They were changed and would remain changed the rest of their lives. Thanks for listening to these last two episodes, the Elma Encounters. While the names have been changed and the dialogue is not necessarily accurate, details are based on actual eyewitness accounts that have been documented throughout the years. For Old Mountain Media and Pacific Northwest Sasquatch Shadows, this has been Something Cryptid This Way Comes. If you like the show, please leave a 5-star rating and a review, and be sure to share this podcast with your friends, family, and all over your social media. Something Cryptid This Way Comes can be heard on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, Amazon Music, and many other podcast carriers, including Luminary.
Something Cryptid This Way Comes is a production of Old Mountain Media. Visit us on Instagram at PNW Sasquatch Shadows and Facebook at Old Mountain Media.
Something cryptid this way comes.